Well, hello and welcome to CSS Hybrid video number 4 entitled Box Properties. I'm Scott McLeod, and in this video session we're going to be focusing on, guess what, the box properties, which include margins, borders, padding, your ability to float things to the left or right, and to give those widths and heights. So let's get to it. We're going to begin by taking a look at our starting point in the browser. It's not particularly impressive, but what we can see is something similar to what we had last time in the previous video, only this is excuse me, the complete blog entry for a particular item. We have an H1 heading, an H2 subheading, and then we have a set of links, which by default so far have been given styles which change their color and give a background as you mouse over them. Of course, part of our goals here is to make this page much more visually interesting and compelling, and to create a multiple column layout without the use of tables. As you scroll down on the current page, you'll see the actual blog paragraph. This is one story, if you will, one blog entry, and you can see between the paragraphs there are these little two short pieces, phrases almost, and what those are something we call pull quotes. They're actually existing within the actual paragraph, and you can see it's just been copied up to there, and this one also exists and was copied up to there. We're going to make those look a little bit more interesting when we get to work with the CSS. Down at the very bottom of the blog entry there's a link to what would be comments that one could look through or post, although as usual our links don't go anywhere in this one page site that we're focusing on, and then a link back to the page that has multiple entries of different blog partial entries, and then of course a copyright at the bottom. So this is what we're starting with, and let's next move to what we're hoping to accomplish, which is considerably more realistic and a little bit more visually interesting. We can see that there's two columns. The links are in the left column, and as you can see the links behave quite a bit more interestingly when we mouse over. We're getting backgrounds and borders and so forth. And here are those pull quotes that have suddenly been given some emphasis and almost act as small images might in terms of drawing your attention to these parts of the page, so that it sort of balances out some of the action that's happening on the left side of the page. Also, you might notice that the H2 is not below anymore, but actually across from or next to the H1. Likewise, this whole blog entry area is sitting next to the menu that it used to be below. So we see some rearrangement of the layout, and that's done without tables, I want to emphasize, purely with usage of those box properties. So let's now move to take a look at the files that I'm giving you as a starting point. There are three files. The HTML starting point is called Daily Spin, and then we have two CSS files. One is called Spin Basic. These are the styles that I have already given you and were in place on the initial browser picture that we saw. And the second file is called Spin Box. This is where we are going to place our box properties. And I have separated into those two different CSS files just for the sake of us being able to focus on box properties and keeping the rest of the styles that are more or less controlling the look of the text, such as basic font properties. I would just keep those separate and out of the way. We'll take a look at it at the beginning and then we'll forget about it. Alright, so let's now go right into our editor. Our editor today is going to be the CSS HTML Validator version 6.52, and I'm now going to open those three files that we were just looking at. You may have to browse to a slightly different folder structure to get to yours. I happen to have mine on my desktop. The folder that you open, however, should be the same, CSS Video 4 box, and inside are those three files. I'm going to open all three of them, and I'm going to control click to get multiple files in that open dialog as usual. And we open all three now, and we're going to take a look at initially the HTML, but also the CSS files. And just taking a look, here you see in the head section that we don't have any styles on the page itself, but we do have the links out to the two CSS files that we were just looking at, Spin Basic and Spin Box. Alright, if we look at the structure of the page, the HTML, or the XHTML as it is, we see, first of all, a couple of what I would call wrappers. These are div tags that are outside surrounding the main content portions of the page, and that allows us to play some games with having additional borders, backgrounds, displaying. In our case, it just gives us a chance to put some color and kind of frame the page with multiple colors, give a nice border to it. Because our page itself, the content area, is pretty much plain in terms of being text and not having any images, so we use this to give it some visual interest. So page is the outermost and content is the inner one. Alright, moving through, we see that we have, again, no tables here, unlike last time, although we're going to try to achieve a similar two-column effect. We have a div to start out. This is an ID called masthead. That's just basically a header area where we have the main headings. It would also oftentimes be an area where you'd have a banner graphic of some sort, though we're staying away from graphics again in this particular page. The next main section is a div that houses the links, and of course the ID for that is links. The individual paragraphs and divs inside just are there to support the structure of the organization of those links. As our site is broken up into different sections, where we have a whole weblog area called Daily Spin, as we had last time, and a portfolio area where we have various pages. All right, then the next, I'm sorry, this really should have continued down to here and gone up to 19. The next section is the blog section, okay, and that contains the initial heading, coffee observations, and then it contains the multiple paragraphs of the actual text, as well as these pull quotes that we saw before. And the pull quotes, again, are just copied text from within the paragraphs themselves, put into a separate div above the paragraph, and then we're going to float those, and for pull quotes we're going to float them to the right, so they'll sit sort of on the right hand side of the paragraphs, with the paragraphs wrapping around them. And there are two of them, and we want to style them the same, so we use a class instead of an ID. Most of the divs prior to this were IDs, unique areas. This we have as a class for two pull quotes. And then finally, down at the bottom, we have a couple of links to, as we saw previously, the possible comments and return back areas. And that concludes the blogs div. And then we have a final div at the bottom called the footer, where we just have a simple one-line paragraph of copyright information. Okay, then we have the two closing divs, and those two closing divs at the bottom are matching up with our page and content divs that we were talking about earlier. Okay, so that's the structure of the page. It's important to see that and recognize that first, because of course we're going to be selecting those areas with our CSS selectors momentarily. All right, the next thing we want to take a quick look at are the existing styles within Spin Basic. We're going to take a look at these now, and then we're pretty much going to forget about them and focus on the box properties as we build the other style sheet called Spin Box. So we have initially some body selector rules, which include the margins for the page itself and the basic blue background that we saw, and a black text, as well as basic font style, which will be in place for the whole page area unless it's changed somewhere else, and that is that the font will be 90% using Trebuchet MS, assuming it's available, otherwise Verdana, otherwise Arial, and as a last resort, whatever the default sans serif font is on that particular machine. And that's basically the style that we use for the links and for the blog paragraphs. Of course, we override this for the headings. Now, the content div has already been given a background, and that's the gray that we see. Then we have an H1, the main heading, and we go for a very large font. It's bold, 300%, and then a Georgia-based serif font. The color is the same color as the page background, which is the dark blue. It's indented 5 pixels just to get the smaller spanned area to move to the right a little bit on the first line. As we saw in the previous video, there's margins given to it to move it around a little bit, and then the words are spaced out and the letters are spaced out. Okay, and the spanned area, which is the little beginning portion, as we saw last time, is a very small font. So this is the Joe Student part, and this is the Daily Spin part. The H2 is the part that ends up getting floated to the right, and we use a different kind of, we're using a shortcut font property here, bold, italic, 130%, and then it's a monospace based font list, Courier New, Courier, and monospace. And the color is a gray. The order, keep in mind, in font shorthand property is important. The bold and italic part can be in either order, but you must have then the font size and followed by the font family list. Alright, the H3, which is the heading in we have one of those. We have one H2, one H1, one H3. The H3 is the one that says coffee observations, and that uses small caps and bold. Again, we're using that font shortcut. 125%, so almost the same size, slightly smaller than the H2, but a different font entirely, going with a serif, Georgia Times New Roman times serif, and the color on that is a red. Alright, now we get to the basic links, and we have basic links and visited links will share the same color. It's essentially a blue, and the text decoration, none. And then when we hover, this is a mistake, by the way. Let's fix that right now. The hover, as well as the active, should be a different color. Okay, and I'm also going to change, while we're in here, the color on the links to be a little bit more blue. So that's 3090 on the link color. So I've made a couple of changes there in the link area, so make sure you get those. Then we have letter spacing of 0, which means we're going to have letters not be spaced out any more than normal. And let's see, where does that come into play? Why are we doing that? We have letter spacing elsewhere specified. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's necessary. but we'll leave it. The blogs area has a line height of 1.5, so we get more spacing between the lines in the detailed blog area, and we have a 1 pixel letter spacing. Okay, in the footer area, we have 80%, so the footer area is smaller, and the color is gray to be less emphasized, and we're aligning into the center. Alright, so that takes care of Spin Basic. Let's save that. And let's go to Spin Box, which should say Box Styles 4. You want to be replacing your name everywhere where it says Joe Student as usual. And let's give ourselves an extra line to work with, and we'll begin now. And we're going to start working with the divs at the beginning of the XHTML document. The first one is the div with an ID of page, and I'm going to keep my styles going 1 per line, and I'll just tab in for each. I'm going to begin with a border. The border that we're going to give is a solid 1 pixel, and then we'll go 3366 cc. Okay, there is a shorthand for these kinds of colors, but we won't bother with them now, as we'll get to them in a later video. Alright, so that's a border, and we're going to follow up that with a background. So we're going to go background color, and the background color there is going to be D8, D8, D8. And I'm going to close that off. We will save our file, and I'm going to go preview. Now I've already have, you may use the preview button yourself. I already have it in the browser, so I can simply go to it and refresh. And what we see isn't much. We see a little gray area there. We don't get much to speak of there. Let's do a little bit more work and come back. We'll go with one more style in here, which is going to be important, and that's the padding, because without the padding there isn't much to see. So we do a 10 pixel padding. Okay. Without padding, the div itself, remember, doesn't take up any space. So without some padding, the background color doesn't even show up. So let's save that and refresh in the browser. So when I refresh, a little better. So you can see you get the padding around that area. Not quite the way it's going to end up looking as we continue, but it's a start. Alright, let's continue now. The next rule we're going to use is to do the content area. Div pound content. The selector, by the way, in both of these cases could be without the div, but I think it just helps to emphasize what it is we're selecting. Alright, in this one we're going to put a border, which is solid 1 pixel, and pound 3366 cc, which sounds like it's identical to the one we had before, and that is because I made a mistake with the one before, which is why it wasn't showing up particularly well. It's supposed to be a 4 pixel border, and the color on that is supposed to be 770000. Okay, so with all of this in place, we should see something a little bit more exciting. Let's go to result here. There we go. That's what I was after. So I needed to add that red 4 pixel border around the outside. Remember, page is on the outside, content's on the inside. So the border on the page gives us the red 4 pixel wide solid, and then there's 10 pixels of padding, and then a border on the content, which is the inner blue border there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. As we go back, we see that this is the red border on the outside, the background color is the gray that we see 10 pixels of because of the padding. Again, because we've wrapped this one around this one, if we don't pad, we don't see the background color. The more you pad, the more you see of it, because the padding is just keeping this div away from that one. And so this one now gets the inner border. Alright, with that in place, we're now ready to start styling up some of the existing text on the page. We're going to start with that masthead area. The masthead is the top portion that consists of the H1 and the H2. So we begin with a similar selector, div pound masthead. Masthead is just a traditional selector for that area. If you're wondering where the heck I came up with that name. And in the masthead area, all I'm doing is setting up some padding to give some space. If we go back to the browser for a second, we'll see the space that we're talking about. You see how there isn't much space here. We need some padding to move this stuff away and down, and probably on both sides. So we'll do padding of, actually going to do 0 on top, 20 pixels on the right, 30 pixels on the bottom, and 20 pixels on the left. It's important, and we're going to see this quite a bit today, is that we go top, right, bottom, and left, sort of as you move around the hands of a clock from top to right to bottom to left. And so this is top of 0, right of 20, bottom of 30, and left of 20. So that's our padding. Let's end that one. Save our styles. And go back to the browser and refresh. All right, you can see we have more space now in this area. We also have more space over here, but we can't see it. Alright, that's the masthead area. Now the actual H2, back to the browser for a second, the actual H2, today's complete blog, is of course sitting below the H1 as it typically would. What we want to do is move it to the right and move it up. Now you could attempt to do that, and I did at first, by trying to do a text align to the right and then giving a negative margin to move it up. But when you move these two blocks next to each other, it wreaks havoc in certain browsers, IE in particular. Just really can't handle it. Doesn't know what to do with it, and it really creates quite a bit of trouble for us. So the way to get that effect is not to do that, but instead to float one or the other of them so that they can exist next to each other. In this case, we're going to float this to the right, and then we can move it up without any problem. Again, I want to remind those of you that might know about positioning that we don't yet know about the positioning properties, so we can't employ those kind of methods in this page. Later we'll learn how we could possibly do that. So all we have to work with basically is float here. So we're going to do that. We're going to do H2 as our selector, and we're going to see if we can move that around. First, we'll just do a float to the right. You can float to the right or to the left. When we float to the right, we should get something similar to if we had aligned it to the right, except it'll go a little bit more extreme to the right when we float. All right, let's refresh. There it goes to the right. It actually respects the padding that we had set up in the masthead. And now we are able to give it a negative margin and move it up, because these two things are kind of independent of each other once you float. So we can move it up and not cause problem. So underneath the float property, I'm going to add a margin, and the margin I'm going to give is -2 EM and 25 pixels. There's no problem with, by the way, with using different units of measure within the same property setting. So this is a -2 EM top margin, which will move it up. A negative top means you're moving it up. And then the right hand is going to be given a 25 pixels, so we're going to move it to the left a little bit as well. And then 0, 0, as we don't really need to move it in the left or bottom areas. Those really don't factor in here. We're just trying to move it up and to the left, mostly up. And let's see what that does. I'm going to use F5 to refresh, by the way. So you can see now that we have moved it up and over, and we've got the effect that we were looking at earlier. So that's our masthead area now. It's kind of similar, when you float, it's kind of like taking an image and aligning it to the right or to the left. In this case, if we had an image here, imagine this text is fancy and it's an image, and we just align it to the right, then this text could in fact sit next to it. So that's what float gives you, to the ability to deal with text. Of course, you can also float images. And there's more to float than just that. I've simplified it, but that's basically what we're using it for here. Okay, the next area that we're going to style is the links area. We're going to move into that. So we're going to create some styles for our links. Remember, there's a div that surrounds our links, and that div has an ID of links, so it's div pound links or just pound links, but I think it makes more sense to go div pound links to be consistent with the styles we've been doing. And I'm actually going to create a blank line to separate sort of the main heading areas from the links areas styles. In fact, you can even put comments in each section to specify, here are my styles for links, and here are the heading styles and so forth, but we won't bother with that right now. Okay, so for the links, what we're going to do first of all is float the whole links area to the left. Now, it is in fact already towards the left, but what we want, remember, is those blog entries to sit next to it. So we're beginning to create a multi-column layout here by floating the links to the left. But before you'll see much happen, when you float, you've got to specify a width for that. And so for our links area, the width of that could be expressed in terms of some kind of fixed measurement such as pixels, but instead what I'm going to do is create a little bit more of a fluid design depending on the resolution that you're at. I'm of course at 800 wide, but the width is going to be given as a percentage of that. So in this case, 20% will go toward the links, leaving the rest of the page for the content involving the blogs to the right of it. Okay, now this is going to have an interesting effect, quite dramatic, and we'll save and then refresh in the browser. So the browser, when I refresh, is going to suddenly place all this stuff to the right of these links. Refresh, and boom. Okay, we're close to what we were after in terms of the two-column look. Things don't line up particularly nicely there. That's something we'll work on. Of course, the links themselves look still pretty dreadful. And notice also down here, what happens is that when you float something, text wraps around it. So the bottom of the blog area ends up, when it gets to the bottom of the link area, it wraps around it. You can actually see the box now of the links area, and this wrapping right around it. Now I don't want that. I want this to be in its own column, just like a table would. And that column should continue even though the links to the left are no longer there. I also don't want these things over here. I want it all to act as if it were in a second column. So I've got some more work to do there, but we're on our way. So to help with that, We're going to do some more styles in here, and we're also going to dress up this area with a border and a background so that it stands out a little bit more. So first of all, I'm going to give a border to that links box, and we'll be able to identify it better that way. It's a solid 1 pixel border, 3366 CC, and a background color, and the background color will be D8, D8, D8. And let's take a look at what that does. Save, refresh, and there's our links now. The border color I gave, by the way, duplicates the border color that we put on the edge of the content div. And that's done purposely because eventually we're going to try to make this border just trace out this area and not even exist right here. You can see what looks to be a thicker border on the left. That's because it's really this border plus this one. So it's two lines. They're sitting right next to, kind of butted up next to one another, so you can't see any space between them, but there's actually two lines there. We're of course going to eliminate that because you didn't see that at all in the final version of this. But you can see now more clearly how the blog area wraps around the links box. Okay, back for more styles now. To continue with this area, what I'm going to do is turn off the border, and I think it's better to put this underneath the existing border to be clearer. I gave the border 1 pixel on all 4 sides in that style, but now we're going to do just border left width to cancel that out on the left only. So looking again at this more closely, border is a shorthand property not only for border width, border style, and border color, but also of left, top, right, and bottom. So if I don't want, in fact, any border on the left, I can go ahead and set it for everything and then come back and zero it out for the left, or for whatever side I'm trying to work with. So that'll help to eliminate the double border we were seeing. And then in addition to that, I'd like to adjust the margin on it, but we'll do that in a minute. So let's save with just that one property change. Come back to the browser, refresh, and we expect to see now only one line instead of two. There you can see it. Now all I've done is taken away the links border. So we're actually looking at the links border, which has 3, and the page content area, which has that 1. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to move this to the left 1 pixel so that the empty area here covers up that border. Because there's no way we can take the page border and say don't show up in just this area. What we can do is basically pick up this box and shift it to the left by 1 by using a negative margin, and then it will cover up the border in that area and give us kind of a unique look. Alright, so to do that, we're going to come back down and do margin left of -1 pixel. And we save. By the way, Control S can save, and we can do a lot quicker that way. And then I refresh with F5, and we see that we have zeroed out, covered up basically. We haven't zeroed it out, we've just covered it up. You can see the text of these links is coming right over where that used to be, which isn't very nice, but we can work with that later. So that's some initial link area work. We're going to work a little bit more in that links area. There's considerably more that needs to be done in that area, but that's a starting point. We're going to come down with a different selector now. Remember that link area consists of primarily a bunch of paragraphs, and then there's links inside those paragraphs. So we're going to use as a selector now links, #links space P. And so with that selector, we're selecting each one of the paragraphs that's inside that div. All right, and what we're going to do there is we're going to indent the paragraphs. So we're going to do text. We've got to move those links to the right now. So one way to do that in a way that won't affect us later very much in terms of what we want in its effect on hovering and so forth, this is just text indent them. So we'll text indent them 10 pixels. We'll give them a margin of 0. That's top and bottom. More than anything else is what we're after there, so that the paragraphs don't have a lot of extraneous space between them. Padding, we're going to do 1 pixel 0. That says 1 pixel of padding on the top and bottom, 0 pixels on the left and right. That's using a shortcut property. And lastly, we're going to do a border bottom. We're going to just have a very subtle separator between these horizontal line, almost like an HR would be. That's a border bottom of 1 pixel solid. And remember, we have already a gray background, and this is another shade of gray that's slightly off of that. E0, E0, E0. So that's just going to give us a very subtle separating horizontal line between the links. And that will become more clear as to why that's helpful later. And let's save. I'll do that with Control S again and go to the browser. And we're going to see these lines coming across here, and we're going to see the text indenting, moving everything over. All right, we refresh. And there you can see all the links have scooted over. And you can see that we're getting the background color coming in there. And if you forget where that background stuff's coming from, remember, that's on all of our links. It's even over here. We will, of course, make some changes to those in this area only. Remember, though, that we used to have some structure to this menu, and some items were, such as most recent, last week, last month, archive, and such, were indented even further. So we're not done yet with styling up that portion. We want to do one more selector to handle that, and those are the level 2 links. So we're going to do #links dot level 2, because there's a class on some of the paragraphs that's actually there's a class called level 2, which is a div inside the links, and then those paragraphs is what we're selecting. So this is a little bit of a complicated selector, and maybe we need to return the HTML for a moment to understand it. It's in the links div, it's in the level 2 div, and there are 2 of them, and it's the paragraph itself that we're going to do text indent on. So let's just remind ourselves of the HTML in that area. So if we scoot down to the links area, here's what we're dealing with. Okay, we're inside this outer div with links. Now we're inside this inner div, which has a class of level 2. There's another one of them down here, which is why we need a class. And then we have paragraphs inside that, and we're text indenting the paragraphs. You can't text indent, by the way, something that's not a block. So we can't text indent the A's. We text indent the paragraph. All right, back to our properties. So now we can see that this selector makes sense. And we're going to do text indent in that area, and the spacing we're going to give is 25 pixels. And we save, and we refresh, and we see this area of links and this area of links get indented. Okay. Alright, that's enough with the links for now. We're going to change direction a little bit, and the next thing we're going to work on is some of the spacing issues with the blogs. and the H3 that's in that blog area. We want this to line up with the top of the box, and we want to decrease some of the spacing there. So let's move into those areas. Okay, so I'm going to give an extra space there below the links area. So next up, we're going to use the selector of H3, and we'll work with the margins of that H3. Oops, 0, 0, 5 pixels, and 0. So what we're doing is, well, it didn't have, I don't think, a left and right that we needed to worry much about. So those are still 0. What we're really after here is the top of it. We want to make that top move up, so we're giving us 0 top margin. H3s by default have more than 0, so we have to move it up to make it match up with where the menu is. Now the menu itself is in a div. Remember, div pound links, and divs don't have a top margin by default. So we're just making the H3 have the same margin that the div has so that they will line up. And that's on the top, and then on the right it's 0, and on the bottom, remember, we're trying to decrease the spacing between the H3 and its paragraph below. So part of that puzzle is to make the H3's bottom margin less, and then we'll also have to make the paragraph's top margin less. And 5 pixels is what we're after there. Okay, so we should see some movement upward, at least. I'm going to save this, go to the browser, and quickly, we should really not see any change in here yet, and we should see this move up and line up better there. So let's refresh and see that. There we go. So we have the div links and the H3 now, both with 0 top margins, so of course they line up much more nicely. Now the other part of the puzzle here is to put a top margin on the paragraphs, which is less than they get by default. Alright, so we come down to the selector is going to be pound blogs, because we're now in the div for blogs, and we probably could have put that in front of the H3 if we chose to. And then it's the paragraphs inside the blogs area that we're trying to style here. So it's pound blogs P. And that area is going to have a margin top of 0, which means that the 5 pixel is the largest of the two, right? The bottom on the top thing and the top on the bottom thing. They both work together, and the bigger of the two dominates, so it's going to end up being just 5 pixels between the H3 and its paragraph below. And we're also going to change the margin bottom on these paragraphs to be 1.5 em. So I do want plenty of space separating the paragraphs themselves. I just don't want space between the H3 and the first paragraph. And I don't even have to select out the first paragraph in any special way, because the paragraphs themselves are one right after the other, and you know, their tops and bottoms will also be working against one another, and it's the 1.5 that will dominate. Alright, let's save. Control S. I'm just using Alt-Tab to get to my browser, F5 to refresh. What we want to see is this space decrease, and you can see that it has decreased. Although we're still getting plenty of space between the paragraphs. Although looky here, we're not getting much space between that and this. That's the pull quote that we haven't yet styled, but since it's a div and not a P, it comes right up against that, because of course the div has no margin above or below, and now this paragraph has no margin above. It does have a margin below. Okay, so let's get back for more styles. That takes care of our first part of the blog area. Now we're going to go after more of the blogs area by using some floating. If we go back to the browser for just 1 second, I want to point out the fact that this is way too close and this is way too close. You could try to do margins on it, but I don't think it's going to have the effect that we really want. Instead, what I want to do with this is use float. if you float two things in the same direction, they'll basically kind of stack up horizontally. So if I float this, see the problem is, again, I want to remove the wrapping. So if this thing is floated and given a width, then it'll act as a box too. And the box, is rectangular, so it can't possibly wrap around anymore. So that's my trick to getting a two-column layout, is to float the second one too, the second column. All right, so let's get to that. The selector for that is going to be div pound blogs, and it really makes sense for that to be above the blogs P. So I'm going to start with that. If I can spell it, blogs, and we're going to set up styles in between there. All right, now that particular selector, and I guess to be consistent with earlier ones, we'll do div pound blogs. All right, finally. Now, we want to float left, as I mentioned. Nothing else that will eliminate the wrapping around the links below it. And let's see the effect that we get from that right off. Save, go to browser, refresh. Okay, what we get are some interesting effects. You see that we definitely are getting the column now and no wraparound from the top all the way down to the links. We get another strange side effect, which is that these guys actually seem to move freely right into what was a padding area for that. It doesn't go past the border, but it does go into the padding area. And that basically, I think, is happening because of the fact that when you float something, it pretty much just goes to the edges of the item itself, and seems to, in this case at least, to IE to ignore those padding areas. Well, that's fine, because we're going to turn around and give a width and some margin restrictions to help. So let's continue with this selector. And the next thing we're going to do is give it a width. Now the width, since I gave the first one in percentages, I'll give this one in percentages too. I'm just going to go 65%. We certainly could go wider than that if we wanted, but I want to give plenty of room to the left and right of it. So that'll work fine for us. Let's save, go to the browser, and refresh and see what we get. Well, you might be quite alarmed by that. I would be too, if we didn't know what was going on. So here's the width of 65%. That's what we asked for. Now what's interesting is when you do that, suddenly we've got two floated items, so there's room on the right for something else to come up. And so the copyright, which was in the HTML way down at the bottom, suddenly is popping up into this area and displaying here. And secondly, the bottom border, which you might think would extend down to the bottom, it doesn't, because these floated items really act pretty much independent of their containers, much more so than you'd think. There is a quick solution to this, and we'll get to it in a second, but we've got to tell this copyright thing to basically go down below the end of these floated items. And thankfully there's a pretty easy way to do that. So let's come back and handle that next. That footer area needs to be told to clear. Clear means basically to go below until you get to the bottom of something that's been floated. So we're going to go pound footer, I guess to be consistent, div pound footer, and then we'll say clear. And with clear, you can say clear the stuff on your left, or you can say clear the stuff on your right. In other words, if there's things that were floated to the right, go below them. If there's things floated to the left, go below them. Or you can say, clear everything, clear both. Just to be safe for now, because we will end up with things floated to the right later. I'm just going to say clear both. I think clear left would work fine for our purposes, but we'll leave that there. Again, you might want to put a little comment that indicates this is, to stay down at the bottom of the page, basically, and that'll keep it from floating, bad term, but bubbling up to the right-hand column. All right, that's all we need really to solve that problem. When we come back to the browser and refresh, things are kind of back to normal now, and the copyright area is down where it belongs. So it cleared, basically it couldn't come down until it cleared the bottom of that, and then it could come down. Okay. If it weren't for the second column, it would clear itself down to this point. But since this has got to work its way down beyond the last floated item. So that's exactly what we wanted, and that keeps the border areas down where they belong as well. Okay, so you can say order has been restored there, and next we want to come back to the blogs P and set up some margins, because as you notice, we still haven't solved the problem of it being too close to the links. So that's next. That's a margin left. Looks like we can use shorthand property here, but we've been doing these for different reasons at different times. So the margin left on that guy is going to be 40 pixels. And we're also going to change the text alignment and justify. I think it just looks nicer if we do that. All right, back to the browser after saving. Okay, so we're going to put a margin here, and we're going to take this jagged edge and make it more aligned nicely when we refresh in the browser, so you can see that happening. Notice we do have some things that are still sticking out to the left, mainly the H3 it looks like, and the pull quotes. Okay, well, we've got more work to do on those. Back to our editor. Alright, that concludes the blogs area there. We're now going to work on the pull quotes. And those are those one little phrases that we're going to move to the right. So the pull quotes, where are they? They're inside the blogs area, so we can do pound blogs, div pound blogs. I'm just doing pound blogs dot pull quote. Remember, there are two of those pull quotes, and we're going to style them both the same. All right, first of all, we're going to float them to the right. What else? We're floating everything in sight here, so we're going to float those to the right and see what we get. We're going to also give a background color, which will help us to see them as we float them to the right. And the background color we're going to give is a very light gray. That's F0, 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 which I believe is the same color that we give to the links area background when we mouse over and hover those links. All right, for now, that's it. Let's save. Let's go to the browser and refresh. And what we see are these little pull quotes that have been floated to the right. Remember, they used to be in this area above. Now they've come down to match the top of those paragraphs, and they are floated to the right. Not very exciting, but they're there, and the text wraps around it. Now what we want to do is control their width, make their width considerably shorter to force them to be on multiple lines. And that'll be a much different look, and then we can style up the individual font properties to our liking and give that box some other properties, borders and whatnot. Alright, so next we go for a width of, this might be surprising, 25%. Sounds like a lot, but it's just 25% of its parent, and its parent is the pound blogs itself. So it's just 25% of the blog's width, which itself was 65%. We don't need to do the math any further, but let's see what that does. What we're we're going to see is, so it's 25% of this width, whatever it might be. So in a wider resolution, it will be a wider box, but it's basically, you know, a couple of words per line. You can see the effect there. So 25% of this width. All right, we still have considerable work to make them look good and stand out, but we've got things situated in the proper spot. All right, to continue, we're going to change the color of those. We're going to make them red with 770000 as their color. And in addition to that, we'll set some font properties. So the font properties, we're going to use shorthand font property 1.4 EM, or 140% basically. And then the font family is going to be Georgia times serif. So a fancy font to do the pull quotes to make them stand out a little bit more and make them large. Save, go to the browser, refresh. And you can see the pull quotes starting to take effect now. We have issues with perhaps some padding, and we want to put some borders on them. Other than that, we're pretty close. So let's continue. The next thing we're going to do is set margins for the text area to move those a little bit away from things. It's 0, 0, 0, and 15 pixels. So that 15 pixels is where? On the left. Okay, so it's going to move it away a little bit from the text to create some space, because it's really jammed up against it. And then in addition to that, we're going to set some padding inside so that the text of the pull quote is not right up against the edge of the gray box. And the padding is going to be 2 pixels on the top, 2 pixels on the right, 0 pixels on the bottom, and 5 pixels on the left. Okay, the left is where we have most of our concern because of the existing blog text sitting right next to the pull quote. So we're going to save, we're going to go to our browser, and we're going to refresh. Okay, now you can see here's the margin on the left. We really didn't need one on the bottom because you kind of get that with the lines for the most part anyway. And the padding that we did just kind of gave us some space in there, you know, top, all around basically. All right, back to our editor. And the last thing we'll do is do the border properties. So to dress up the box itself and really bring more attention to it, making it a little bit more striking, we're going to do border. Now the border is going to be solid, and it's going to be red. Same red color that we've used elsewhere, 770000. Now I didn't bother to give a border width. So by default, I get a thin border, which I believe is more than 1 pixel. I think it's 2 pixels. But it doesn't matter what it is, because we're going to control that specifically in this manner by setting the border width all around in a separate rule, which would override whatever the border gave it by default. 1 pixel on the top, 3 pixels on the right, 0 on the bottom, 0 on the left. So 2 of the borders are there, 2 are not there. Let's see what that does for us. We go back to the browser, and you can see a 1 pixel border on top, a 3 pixel border on the right, and nothing on the bottom, nothing on the left. Okay. And that concludes our work with the pull quotes. All right, now we return back to the links. We want to do a little bit more work with these links to dress them up a little bit more. And then we'll be done. So back up to the link area. and we have a set of rules that we're going to throw in to our existing links area, and we're going to put those right below the existing level 2 based rules that we had before. It's pound links :hover, and since the active link states are going to be the same, pound links :active, and we're going to grab them both and style them both the same. You don't always want that, but in this case it makes it easier for us to do the styles. And initially we're going to do a border left of 3 pixels, pound 770000, and solid. By the way, if you're wondering, it doesn't really matter what the order is to you can see that it's different, for example, than what I gave here, doing solid last. I probably should be consistent, but the browser could care less. The order of those doesn't matter, unlike the font shorthand property. Okay, so that, let's see what that does. That's a left border of 3 pixels of red on the links when I hover. All right, back to the browser. So what I'm expecting is a big left red border on these when I mouse over. Let's refresh so we can see that. There it is. Now, to me, that border is too close to the link itself, and we want to move it to the left a little bit and do some other work as well. Oh, sorry. Also notice there seems to be movement. Okay, you can really see it when we do this and compare it to the thing above. It's shifting the whole link itself to the right by 3 because it suddenly has a border where it had none before. So you can see it shifting. And we don't want that. Normally you want to avoid shifting stuff because, of course, you can do all kinds of crazy things in terms of increasing font size when you mouse over. Generally, it's a bad idea. You don't want everything shifting around. It's not too bad because only the link itself is shifting here, but it's really a lot worse when other things around it start shifting. But we're generally going to try to avoid that. All right, and so one thing that we're going to do is add a style above, which will help us. It's pound links A. And we're styling all links with that are in that area in general. We're not bothering to mention whether it's hovered or whether anything. It's just basically covering all of that. And the property is display property, and we're telling it to display as a block. What we're doing there is we're taking an A tag, which by default would be an inline thing, and we're making it display as a block. What that does is it makes the links act as if they cover that whole area inside the div. We'll save and we'll see what that means in terms of its effect on the browser. Now, when I refresh, a couple things happen. Okay, if the link now goes from there to there, then the border moves away from our link, and the background suddenly now covers that whole area very nicely. However, we're still getting movement. You see how it's still shifting the text when I mouse over. So we haven't resolved that, but we have really helped out in terms of getting a nicer effect and not just this little, not just this little area where the background is appearing. All right, back now for more work here on the links. Okay, so we've done that. We need to move down back into the hovering styles now, and whoops, I never closed, look at that, I never closed that, so pardon me for that. Now if we go back to the browser after saving this, we should see some results. Yeah, I had some problems. If you may have noticed that canceled out some of my other styles. Alright, so things are still okay here, and we still have our H3 that doesn't have the same margin as everything else. But at any rate, we're okay in terms of our links. Let's continue with that area. Okay, so now in addition to the border left, I'm also going to add in now a border on the bottom. The border on the bottom is just going to be 1 pixel, same color, 770000, and still solid. Alright, we save. We go back to our browser, and what we're expecting here when we refresh is a border below. Now you can see more shifting. Do you see how things are shifting? Why is that? Because suddenly there's a border on the bottom where there wasn't one before, pushing everything else down as we mouse over. So that's actually affecting the height by 1 pixel of the whole div itself, and so you're getting this bouncy effect, which is not really something you want. So how can we counteract that? Well, this border is coming out of nowhere. Suddenly there's 3 extra pixels on the left, 1 extra pixel on the bottom every time we mouse over. We can compensate for that so that there is no movement if we take away something else when we add the border. And the typical trick to that is padding. So what we're going to do now is add some padding to the links in their normal state. Their normal state would be pound links :link and pound links :visited. And in that state, we're going to give them some padding. We're just going to give them exactly the padding that needs to be compensated. We don't need to compensate on the top. We don't need to compensate on the right. We're only compensating for the areas where we put borders before, which is on the bottom 1 pixel and on the left 3 pixels. With that padding in place, you can see now that when the links are not being hovered, there's 1 pixel of padding on the bottom, 3 pixels of padding on the left. When we mouse over, we have borders in those places, but we want to have no padding so that there's compensation. So the padding now all around is 0. And that should take care of it. We should now basically have the same height and width whether we're mousing over or not. Thus, we should have no movement. Okay, now when we mouse over, you can see things are still. We get the nicer effect that we might want. Now I want to mention also while I'm here that there is this difference in the way the links are handled by Internet Explorer versus some of the other browsers such as Netscape or Mozilla, Firefox, and those. And that is that if you put your mouse to the right of the links, for that matter to the left of them, they don't activate as you might want them to or think that they should, only when you're actually over the link itself. Now we already said that the links should display as blocks, and it has the effect of making the link look like it extends to the edges, but for some reason IE still doesn't activate them when you mouse over. It should but doesn't. There's a way to make IE do it, but when you do that you can in turn screw up what the other browsers that were actually following the CSS correctly before. So you kind of end up having to play games with trying to hide some rules from certain browsers, or have some browsers not look as good as others. So I'll just mention what that would be. If we wanted to focus on IE, then we could, in addition to displaying as a block, we could put that the width of that is 100% of that area. You shouldn't need to do that, and doing so can cause some effects. So I'm going to put a little comment in there and just say it's for IE only that we're doing that. And so we'll save. When we come back to IE and refresh, now you can see that it goes ahead and responds regardless of where your cursor is, to the left, to the right, or on the link, which is nice. But in other browsers we'll have a problem with the width of these things extending beyond the edge slightly and not look quite as nice. For example, I think I have it here in Firefox, and I can show you the unfortunate side effect. There you can see how it extends too far. The width of 100% apparently is too much. So it's nice in one browser, not so nice in the others. But that takes care of the links area. And let's look once again at the H. For whatever reason, my H3, where's my H3? The H3 margin doesn't seem to be proper. Okay, I'm going to try to fix that left margin problem on the H3. It's top, right, bottom, and left. So the left margin on that, it should match with what we ended up with on blogs, I think, to the right of the links. Let's just try 40 pixels on that. And save. And go to the browser. And refresh. There we go. So the H3 now has its proper margin. Don't ask me why we did that last, but it just came out that way. Sorry about that. And so we have our final page. Just to confirm what we did, we used a whole lot of box properties to work through some of this. About the only thing we didn't use of the box properties is height, and height really is much less commonly needed or used. Occasionally it is, but you know, if you're setting the width of this and the width of this and the width of this, you just want the height to be whatever it ends up being based on that width. You don't want to give a height and a width normally, because you can have some overflow problems when different fonts come into play on different machines and stuff. So I usually go with one or the other, and most times that's width. But we saw a lot of margins, we saw a lot of padding, we saw a lot of borders to create all kinds of different effects. Much more could be done with this page. We certainly could take all kinds of different approaches to the pull quotes, and all kinds of different approaches to what we want those links to do when we mouse over them. So this is just one, little example. The reason, by the way, I did it this way is I tried to match. It's almost like these guys and these guys work together. This is top and right, and this is bottom and left, so they almost kind of work together to form a box. So it's kind of the motivation behind those two going together like that, with the 1 pixel on the top bottom and 3 pixels on the left right. At any rate, hopefully you got some good ideas on what you can do with the float. There's more we can do to lay out pages, certainly, when we get to more positioning properties later on. But for now, this is about as extensive as we can do with usage of float. So again, I thank you for your patience through this rather long video, and hope that you learned some things that will be useful to you in the future. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.